The information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. InsideAnalysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome to the future indeed. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here on the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. And folks, we have an all-star cast lined up for you today. I'm very excited. This is the first of a three-part series of a pilot called The Foundry. And we've got the founder of The Foundry on the call right now. CEO Neal Hansch is with us today. And also we've got Alex Freed from Schematic Ventures. And we have Suketu Gandhi from A.T. Kearney, a supply chain expert. So let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves real quick. Neal Hansch, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining the fray. Pretty hot topic these days. What do you think?
No question. And Eric, thanks again for having me back on the show, and excited for the conversation. Just to provide the quick overview of Foundry, right? We were a business started 10 years ago. We were acquired by Kearney last summer, and our core business is helping the Fortune 1000 navigate external innovation, and seeing, increasingly over the years, looking to understand what is happening with all of these emerging companies the world over. Doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, or where these large Fortune 1000 players are based. But to your point, figure out what's happening. And one of the through lines of all the corporates we work with, supply chain. And so, it is a universal importance. It has been particularly interesting over the last few years, which we'll get into over the course of this show. But thank you again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex Freed dialing in, tell us a bit about yourself and what your role is in the world of supply chain.
Absolutely. And Eric, also want to thank you for having me on the show, and excited to be here with Neal and Suketu today. So I'm a partner at Schematic Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital fund based in San Francisco, and we are sector focused. So we invest in all things industrial technology related, in particular, companies building in the areas of supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, transportation, decarbonization. So a lot of fun stuff going on in that world. We invest in brand new companies. So we see founders at the very beginning of their journey, sometimes at the ideation stage, and get to kind of see the latest and greatest of all the new technologies that folks are thinking about as applied to these categories.
That's a lot of fun. That's a cool place to be. Years ago, I spent, I guess, about 5 or 6 years on the advisory board for the South by Southwest Innovator. They had an accelerator program, basically, which was all about new companies coming out. And so it's kind of same thing, right? I get to judge the different applicants, and it was all about learning like what the cutting edge is. What are people working on right at the razor's edge? That's a cool place to be. And last but not least, Suketu Gandhi from A.T. Kearney. You've written a book about supply chain. What's the title of the book?
Well, the title of the book should have been "Things Are Changing Fast. You need to know how to deal with them." But the publisher said, "Hey, you know what? That may not sell. So what we're doing is really talking about supply chains and what are the fundamental principles in this dramatically changing world, and how do you act today? How do you act tomorrow? And more importantly, how do you plan for day after tomorrow, where things could have even more variability in the way, the various crises, but also opportunities. There's a lot of talk on crises, but I think there should be even more talk on the opportunities that are coming as a result of these disruptions."
Well, it's funny you should say that. I recall learning years ago that the Chinese character for chaos is very, very similar to the Chinese character for opportunity, because out of chaos, there's tremendous opportunity, right? And you look at the world now, and, it's funny. So we talked before the show, I've got some background in supply chain, and supply chain is probably the most complex space in business. I mean, absent maybe life sciences or something, if you really get into the human genome and things of that nature. But supply chain is so complicated because there are so many interdependencies. There are so many branches. There are so many bits of details about way people capture information. I'm a data guy, so I think in terms of how you persist data, it's very difficult to even show a supply chain to any meaningful depth because, for an automobile, how many parts go into an automobile? Thousands of parts and all these suppliers. And what's interesting, and I'll throw it back to you, Suketu, is that we had fair warning before COVID because we had all those tariffs. And I remember that was tremendously disruptive. I'm a cyclist, and you could not get a bike part for like a year, all through, whatever it was, 2018 or something like that into 2019. You could not get bicycle parts because they were all in China, and we couldn't get them because of the tariffs. So it's like we had advance warning, and then COVID hit, and then post-COVID. So we're in a very strange place right now. But what's your take on how to navigate through that? How do you advise your clients to just get a handle and make sure you're moving in the right direction?
So to start with, you were lucky you actually had a bike because bicycles were really hot during COVID.
Right.
And then the parts that go with that. So the way I wanted to kind of put a simple definition of what are supply chains, right? Supply chains are a mechanism where you deliver products and services that a customer wants, and then you bring in your internal resources, your factories, your distribution centers, your planning people, and your suppliers together to deliver it where they want it, when they want it, how they want it, and for a fair price. So supply chain is what I would call the heart of the business combined with the stomach, if you may, to make it very simple. So that's a really important part. Now, what happens is anytime there is a small bit of disruption, for a long period of time, supply chains were broken down into silos that said, you're a product guy, so you think about products. You're a guy who plans what should be made. You're a guy who distributes. You're a gal who manufactures, and you're here in somebody in procurement who deals with the suppliers. And everything was broken down into silos because we were in a game, or we ever fooled into a world that said everything will work as it's supposed to work.
Right.
We know that doesn't happen. So
Right.
One of the big things we're talking about are, one, think about this end to end. And second, you said something really important, Eric, which is think about the data. Because the data it gives is the one that gives you the light to understand what is happening in the whole end-to-end world.
Right.
And the latest view is there are two factories in the world: the AI factory, as Jensen Huang called them, and then the second one is factories that produce things. And bring them together, and you have the supply chain of tomorrow, in simple words.
Yeah, that's fascinating because with AI, we can do lots of different, very powerful things like predict, for example. I mean, and just to give some background to the audience, as a procurement person, obviously you've got your bill of materials that you need to supply to your warehouse, to your manufacturing plant, et cetera. And being able to see who has which part and also how reliable those people are, because that's one of the key factors, right? Is understanding reliability over time. It's like, okay, XYZ provider has a better price, but are they reliable? Well, let's take a look. If you have the data and you can build a baseline, then even in difficult times, you can predict, well, maybe they're not. Maybe we should just pay more and make sure we get that, right? It's always a balancing act. But the thing is, with the data and with the trained algorithms, and they have to be trained and they have to be focused and very on point. But if you have that, then you could do a much better job of managing this end-to-end process. And that's where the magic is, right?
That is absolutely where the magic is. So the old days, used to follow what we would call the plan and pray model. You plan for something and pray like heck that the products would be ready.
Right.
But the world we are in, that my friend Neal and I work a lot on, is we call it a sense and pivot world, which is you're constantly sensing what's happening on the demand side. You're constantly sensing what's happening within your four walls. You're sensing what's happening on the supply side. And depending on the situation, you pivot. And you pivot. One of the complexities in supply chains is because it deals both with carbon-based life forms and silicon-based life forms. Silicon-based life forms are dependent on data, and they can move quickly, whereas carbon-based take time. So you can't just open a factory. You can't move logistics networks overnight. And so now you have to create those buffers in the middle that allow you to deal with these variances along the way, both on the supply side as well as the demand side. That's why we call it sense and pivot.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I'll throw one more question over you and then maybe bring you into the conversation. One of the real keys in supply chain, and I think we're making good ground these days, but you can let me know your thoughts, is having visibility not just into what you need, but into what all of your partners and suppliers have. And consumers who shop online have seen the leading indicators of this, meaning you'll be shopping for a jacket and it'll say 14 left in stock, for example.
Yeah.
There are systems of record being monitored to be able to deliver that kind of information because you're tracking the warehouse, you're tracking what's available. And so the more visibility you have into your suppliers and what their conditions are, and I mentioned, of course, the score, reliability score, but just knowing what they have and what you can get access to in a reasonable period of time, that's the key. But that's a very difficult thing to do because you need all of them to publish information in a format that you can then access and consume in your enterprise. Is that about right?
You are spot on. And what is wonderful is both consumers and B2B customers actually send indication on what they're going to need in the next few weeks. So for example, we have trained algorithms that tell us about 12 weeks out with 94% accuracy on what somebody might buy.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is data is available, but we always look for definitive data. That means, is it 100% accurate? And the reality is it doesn't need to be. I need to apply statistical tools to them to understand what is the probability of something happening. And that is a significant mindset shift. So I can deal with partial data. Data may not be perfect, but at least it's a wonderful indicator. And that is a significant mindset shift from the old days where we said everything had to be perfect.
Right.
It doesn't have to be.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point you just made. I'm reminded of Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, is it in the box? Is it out of the box? And I explain to people, like, for sure, in a real world, it's either in the box or out of the box. Okay, there's no way it's in and out of the box. But for purposes of developing probabilistic algorithms and determinations, that's why you talk about it being maybe in the box, maybe outside of the box. But you make an excellent point. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want a high score. I want it to be like 90% or higher to be able to make my plans because things change. To your point, I mean, I was joking with, not really joking, but talking with Neal before the show about Houthis having hypersonic missiles firing at ships in the Red Sea. Like, who saw that coming? They didn't want to have that in their bingo card for this year. Not me. So you're right that you don't have to be perfect, but you do want to have the data. You do want to score the data and then adjust it over time. Real quick, final comment that I'll bring Neal in. Go ahead, Suketu.
No, I think that's a great way to think about it, right? Schrodinger's cat, whether it's alive or dead, really depends on the data. And now we have sensors, for example, that allow you to connect everything from where the product is being used. What do the trucks say? What do the factories tell us? And what is happening at your suppliers? So, Schrodinger's cat today would be fully instrumented, and we would use that information to drive our supply chains.
That's a quote. I love that. All right, Neal, I'm going to bring you back in. I'm going to laugh for a couple minutes here. Schrodinger's cat is now fully instrumented. That's brilliant. But Neal, you consult with companies all the time. Your clients look to you for information about how to innovate, how to stay on top of things. And I think Suketu made an excellent point there. The supply chain now is very well instrumented, and that's wonderful stuff because these little devices, they tell the truth, right? They're seeing what's happening. You're not asking someone their opinion. You're like, device, are you on? Okay, you're on. Good. Go ahead, Neal.
Yeah, no, and I'm trying to see if I can keep building on the metaphor. I think I can't, but you reminded me. Actually, last week, Suketu and I, we had a 2-day Future of Supply Chain event that we were hosting. And so in the audience are a wide collection of global, supply chain officers, chief supply chain officers. And it reminded me, one of the comments, of course, was there is no silver bullet, and there probably will never be a silver bullet, but a bronze bullet would be incredible. Right. Meaning, and how do you get there? And it's all of these devices are data collection points. And then there's the next order, which is, and those will do nothing more than continue to grow and grow and grow. But then there's the next order of, okay, but what do you do with the data?
Right.
How do you make it actionable? And at some point, how do you automate the actions that are taken from it? And I think this is certainly what we see as we kind of bridge over to startup land. Right, mm-hmm. Which is either startups that are empowering the collection of data, so industrial IoT, even low Earth orbit satellite networks that can track the ships in the sea. So it's just on and on and on. It also does kind of remind me and harken back to like blockchain was going to be a panacea, right? Big vendors would require, or big buyers would require all their vendors to be on it, and transparency in real time. Still a lot of work to be done there. I was also enjoying, this is probably just a sign of our age, back when RFID tags, and it was, okay, we're going to RFID tag every single, toothbrush. And it turned out the tag was more expensive than the brush itself. But again, just all of this is the mass increase in the data points that then can be parlayed into all of these, these elements of what a supply chain professional has to worry about. I think the other thing that certainly the next word after data is all things AI. If we look at the main categories that we're seeing, and as we advise the corporations we work with on, okay, if the intersection of the word supply chain and AI, what should we be thinking about? Where are the ways that it's going to impact positively our day-to-day job? I think a handful that I would rattle off, and they're in varying degrees of maturity, varying degrees of venture investment going into them, which I'm sure Alex will be able to touch upon. But it's things like back office automation, just a lot of blocking and tackling, logistics automation, so autonomous trucks and what have you, warehouse automation, think, robots, and computer vision, automated quality checks coming down the line. That's also often computer vision, inventory management. I think we've already touched a bit here about predictive analytics, demand forecasting. And then there's even the region-specific forecasts, right? Whether there's seasonality, weather, right? So now you've got a lot more AI models trying to bake those, and there's an endless series of data points, right, that they can consume and once trained. So, anyways, so I think this is kind of indicative. There is so much innovation happening out there, much of it coming from the technology platform incumbents. But we might posit even more coming from companies that didn't exist 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And when we go back to that silver bullet comment, one of the questions we asked, and there is no right answer, but where do you think that innovation is going to come from? The players that you've been buying from for the last 10, 20, 30 years, or players that are just forming right now? And our view is, of course, is it's going to be a mix of both.
Right. That's right. And I mean, you made a bunch of excellent points there. And just for the audience to understand, the key is to be able to string together the end-to-end process within your organization such that your planning software, your logistics, the software your people are using can consume this information, can consume these predictions, can understand, and you have your options, right? You want to have options. If this plant is on fire somewhere in Ukraine and we're not going to be able to get that part anymore, what are our other options? And the bottom line is that machine learning algorithms and AI are much better at scanning across vast troves of data points than human beings will ever be. So you want to be able to use these technologies to your advantage, but don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to an all-star cast of supply chain experts. We heard from Neal Hansch and Suketu Gandhi in the opening segment. And now up next, Alex Freed. Alex, you're out there on the front lines trying to figure out where are the hot takes, who has the right technology. And the I guess the blessing and curse of the whole supply chain world is that there is an embarrassment of riches and opportunities, right? I mean, you have everything from the data collection, the instrumentation, and I think probably the hardest nut to crack is the orchestration of all that data, being able to bake policies in and rules and preferences and other such things to manage the data, because how do you even visualize this stuff? And what's interesting to me is no one seems to have really dominated the IoT space. I don't see any player who really owns everything. All the big guys have some skin in the game, but no one really owns it yet. But Alex, what do you see out there, and where are you focused?
Well, as it relates to IoT, we definitely saw a large wave of new companies building IoT-related devices with, let's say, predictive analytics, looking at predictive maintenance, or perhaps to be able to track goods and provide visibility into where they are during transportation. So, a sensor that goes on a parcel or a pallet or inside of a container, or whatever the case may be. I think what we found there is, one, a lot of value that those are providing, in particular for high value machines or high value goods. So for example, those sensors, found that, let's say, if it was high value electronics or perhaps things like jewelry or precious metals or even pharmaceuticals, which in that case are also temperature sensitive and sensitive to other things, tons of value. But as you get down to other types of goods that are perhaps less valuable in and of themselves, it was hard to justify the ROI for companies. So I think that's always been a potential friction point of, even though the technology is amazing and would love to have that, how much does it cost and what is the ROI related to it? One just an example on that end is, in the warehouse, people wanted to put better tags and trackers on every single item, but at the end of the day, barcodes are still what everyone uses because they're super cheap.
Right.
So that's kind of on the IoT side of the world. And then I think one of your questions as well was, what are we seeing now in terms of new technology and new companies being founded? And I think, to no surprise to anyone here, seeing a lot around LLMs and generative AI. And I think in particular where we've seen that type of AI used to great effect is as it relates to collaboration across multiple parties. So we know supply chains are highly fragmented, multi-agent systems, and today the common denominator for collaboration across the parties is still email, phone, text, WhatsApp, WeChat, kind of all these more traditional or horizontal methodologies. And we've seen in the past companies, let's say, create a supplier portal where the supplier has to come in and interact with that portal such that that communication then flows to the brand or the manufacturer, the OEM, and everything theoretically lives within that platform. But in reality, that supplier might have 10 clients they're working with 10 different platforms, or perhaps the engagement on that platform is infrequent, and so they forget about it and things go out of date. But one really valuable application I think we've been seeing of LLMs and generative AI is the fact that it can interpret emails, put them into your system, and then communicate back to folks. And it's also an area where the cost of mistakes is relatively low. Like if you screw up a little bit on an email or something along those lines, usually it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not making a decision that is hypercritical, especially without a human in the loop for oversight. And so when we look at that, part of what we think about then is we know that this technology is really effective with these modes of communication to both ingest them and then also draft something back out to communicate or automate that communication. And so what is the workflow that this company is putting together around that core technology such that it fits with the users on both sides? And to what extent do they understand the real life workflow of this customer base in order to make sure that the technology is used to the highest degree of effectiveness?
Yeah. That's very, very interesting stuff. I love that you brought in LLMs to consume emails and then parse, because one of the really cool things these engines can do is to summarize and to just serve as an agent with which you can communicate. So basically, you can have every email coming in absorbed by the LLM and also going to its target. So you get the target. But you know what I found? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Alex. AI is very, very good at reminding people or making suggestions about things. And I think that's where probably 80% of AI's impact will take place, is in suggestions. So you're in your console, you're doing your job of procurement, and ding, a little message comes up that says, hey, we just saw an email from Bangalore and they're suggesting that this product is delayed. Do you want to use the other supplier, for example? And the user will go, well, gosh darn, yeah, I will. Click yes. And then, of course, every time you do that, you're helping the model train, theoretically. What do you think about that, Alex?
I agree. Definitely a lot of application as it relates to making suggestions for the user or for the end customer there. One creative example that we've seen a company mention or be interested in is you have an organization with, let's say, 10, 20, 100 operations folks who have their own suppliers or their own clients who they're speaking to. And there could be a supply chain shock or an event. Perhaps it's like a weather-related event happening in Chicago that's going to affect multiple customers or multiple modes of transportation. But me as an individual operator, I only have 3 clients or 3 partners that would be impacted. But my company probably has 100. And if someone starts getting a few pings or a few emails, then because this AI agent or system has visibility across everyone's communication, everyone's emails, it can recommend to me to say, hey, by the way, we noticed other people in your organization are seeing this. You may want to proactively reach out to your partners or your customers and get ahead of this. So one interesting, I think, example of this type of AI suggesting things that in a timely manner that we've seen that could be quite effective and very interesting across the organization, bridging together people who have kind of point visibility and combining it all together.
Yeah, that is just as an absolutely huge deal. And maybe Suketu, I'll bring you back into the conversation here to comment on this. One of the best things I've heard about AI is to treat it like a team member, essentially, and realize that it is an active force in the organization. Of course, you have to set it up properly, you have to manage it. All these things are kind of requirements. But nonetheless, as Alex just suggested here, if you set it up right, it has access to all these emails going around. So it can sense patterns that are occurring right now and give you feedback and say, hey, maybe you should jump on this. It looks like this is going to impact you as well. What do you think about that as a go forward strategy to at least start investigating how to use these kinds of technologies? Because once you live in a world where you're getting those recommendations, it's really hard to go back to the darkness. What do you think?
No, I think that is very well put, what Alex said and the way you surmised it. But I'll give you a practical example. We are using LLMs with the RAGs to understand what is happening in the world of some of the complex logistics procurement. The LLM might think that, hey, a load is a load. It might think of a financial load or things of that sort. But the moment you add a RAG on top, it tells you, hey, in this context, a load is the goods you put on a truck. Right. And then you take that information, and now you have the massive ability to take all of that information and apply heuristics and logistics against that, because you have a data set that is being collected over the last 20, 30, 40 years of time in terms of reliability, cost, impact, things of that sort. And now you can say, here are the recommended actions, if you may. The second thing you talked about was agents, and it's really important. And I had a conversation with a CHRO of a very large company, and they have a couple of 100,000 people. Said, do you start thinking about your agents as actual employees? Because if you do, then you will start thinking about evaluating their actions, understanding their actions, and modifying them based on what they do good and areas that need improvement. Because that's a different way about thinking about this new technology that comes in. And it brings together the concept we call the whole brain. That is, human intelligence plus artificial intelligence should be the brain of the enterprise, versus thinking of them separately. And that's where the power we think is going to be unlocked over the next 3 to 5 years in a massive way.
Yeah, I have to agree. And maybe, Alex, I'll throw it back over to you. Figuring out how and where to deploy these kinds of technologies, that's one of the biggest challenges. Figuring out which vendors should be on your short list for a particular space is a big consideration as well. But I almost think that at this point in time, changing minds and opening minds is a big part of the conversation. And these LLMs, from what I've seen, I've been in this business a long time, these LLMs have absolutely opened the eyes of business leaders. They now see, oh, wow, we really should be focused on this stuff. It's kind of like cloud was 10 years ago. I thought cloud was going to take off like 20 years ago. And it took about 10 years longer than I thought. And then all of a sudden, it just started really going in full steam. And I think a big part of that is a guy named Satya Nadella from Microsoft, who somehow managed to pivot this aircraft carrier in a different direction in a pretty short period of time. And I think we're in that big of a pivot, speaking back to this concept of pivot, right? Sense and pivot. I think organizations have got to start pivoting to really understanding that these AI technologies are the game changers. And if you don't investigate them, you're going to be in big trouble. What do you think, Alex?
No, I 100% agree. And I think there's two elements of that. One is the leadership of an organization needs to be forward thinking and thinking about how to apply technology within their business. And obviously, Neal and Suketu do a lot of work with those corporations to help them structure their thinking around that aspect of it. And then the other part that we like to consider as well is then the implementation of that technology. And part of that comes back to, Eric, I think what you mentioned, you have different technology vendors and which one is going to work better for a particular organization, right? So, we're talking a lot about LLMs. One example in the physical world, you would see sometimes, let's say a small factory or a machine shop, they would want to adopt robotics and it'd be kind of a top-down initiative, and they would get a robot and everyone's very excited about it. And then once the executives go away and everyone goes back to producing the goods that they were producing, the robot is kind of pushed into a corner and forgotten about because it wasn't really implemented well, and it wasn't running as well as expected. Perhaps there was a lot of issues with the way it was integrated into the line, or perhaps the other folks, the people working there didn't trust it for one reason or another, and then it just gets wheeled out again when the executives come back in. So how do you avoid that, not just with a physical robot, but also with some of these AI-related tools? And I think a lot of it comes down to ensuring that the way that they are implemented is truly valuable to the people who are going to interact with them, right, and also is done with an understanding of their actual day-to-day work, right? It's not trying to force them into a structure that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit the realities of that industry or of that, whatever function that AI agent is operating in, but very critical to actually fit in with the way that these people do their work and provide value to them, to promote that engagement and make sure it's not just sitting in the corner and wheeled out when they want to show it off to someone and then it goes right back into that corner.
No, that's exactly right. And we only have 2 minutes left in this segment, but as you were talking, this is what I love about doing these shows with smart people like we have on the show today. I had these epiphanies about things, and there's something I'm going to tease this subject. And Suketu, I want you to just offer a quick answer, and then in the next segment, let's dive into this. I'll tell you something that's going to be very compelling. I sense this. You can tell me if I'm wrong. There has been for years and years this IT-OT divide, right? Information technology, operational technology. And very few people know how to bridge those two worlds, but I'll bet a smart AI engine can figure out how to bridge those two worlds, because LLMs can write not just in English and French and Spanish, they can write in COBOL, they can write in Java, they can write in C# and C++. Do you see, you got like 60 seconds, do you see LLMs playing a significant role in fusing finally these worlds of OT and IT communications?
Oh, well, so potato is what used to be with IT and OT, and both of them thought that they were special, to be transparent. LLMs will play an important role, but there are even simpler technologies, right? Like you talked about, Eric, in the past of, hey, how do you get the underlying data in a simple, cohesive manner so that allows you to interpret it through a machine very easily? Mm-hmm. So that's where the biggest help is going to come. IT and OT was the real terms, a false dichotomy created, because that's where the work was being done, right? I work on the machine floor, so I am OT. Right. I work on the planning side, so I am IT, but it's all a supply chain. And the way we break it down is with this end-to-end silo, and LLMs can help there. 60 seconds.
Okay, that was excellent. So folks, don't touch that dial. I'm like totally immersed in this conversation. We'll be right back. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
To the future. To Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome back to Inside Analysis. What a fantastic conversation we're having here with Neal Hansch of Silicon Foundry, Alex Freed of Schematic. Did I get that right? What is it? Ventures?
Schematic Ventures.
Schematic Ventures. I'm sorry. That's my bad. Like there's a company, Samarki, it just jumped into my head. Schematic Ventures, I got it right next time. And Suketu Gandhi from A.T. Kearney, all about the false dichotomy of IT and OT. I'm kidding. We're talking about supply chain today, and we're talking about AI. And where can you, this is what every business person is wondering now. Like, where can I leverage this stuff? It looks great. LLMs themselves, not too good at lots of enterprise tasks. A lot of companies are kind of learning that now. Yes, it's good at writing copy, that's for sure. A lot of these engines know a lot of stuff. I mean, but the key to remember with these LLMs is that they are consensus engines because you vectorize this information. So dog has been vectorized in this particular fashion. Cat, Schrodinger's cat is just a version of a cat, but the vector is very similar to just a cat. So they're giving you an average of something, and that's good for a lot of different use cases. But business people want to know, where can I leverage AI for business benefit today? I'll throw it over to Neal Hansch. How do you counsel your clients when they're asking you these questions?
Yes. And so I think, a big chunk of the conversation on the show here today has been the intersection of AI with supply chain. But I think, if we back up, and to your point, the corporate executives are trying to figure out what's real, what's not, what's actionable today. I think also in the context of what popular press is covering. So certainly things like ad tech and martech, right? Content generation, video and what have you. But I think what we see is the lowest hanging fruit that have the biggest impact and are already proven use cases. So things like, if the company has software coders, right, you're going to use AI solutions to help on the coding side of things right off the bat. Just knowledge management. I think a lot of the use cases we've seen, here's a massive company with stores of knowledge spread throughout the classic, siloed disparate systems. It was a head of AI at a large financial services institution who gave this example. It's not the most positive one. And he said, how many times a day do folks ask the question of, how do I fire somebody at the company, right? And it takes them 4 hours to figure out, and boy, if they can put that in the chat GPT or equivalent, that's pulling from the internal sources. So just things like that, when you add it up at scale, hundreds, thousands of knowledge worker, hours. Areas like customer service, customer support, which that does get a lot of popular press, but we're talking to an organization the other day, and you look at it as a complement to the agent. And yes, we recognize it also can be a replacement, right? How many tech support calls or I forgot my password. So I think these are, and then a lot of the areas within supply chain, this was seen, obviously AI is woven into all the robotics automation solutions. AI is woven into all the computer vision related solutions. So, but I think, it's kind of for some of these large companies, it's the walk before you run. It's the where can I absolutely get value out of this? And of course, we always think about it, regardless if it's on the leading edge, the bleeding edge, or what we would define as right down the middle right now, is how can I do the pilot and then do a successful rollout at scale, for these companies that have thousands, if not tens of thousands, or in some cases, hundreds of thousands of workers spread, across the globe.
Yeah, you just brought up something very interesting, and I haven't heard anyone say this yet, but I think it is truly inspired. This is knowledge management. Like, well, years and years ago, we're talking 30 plus years ago, knowledge management was a big thing, but we just didn't really have the tech. We didn't have the capacity to absorb large amounts of unstructured data and then deliver some harmonized view of that information. Now we do. That's what these AI agents, or that's what these LLMs do extremely well, is knowledge management. So to your point, if you have the confidence to point an LLM to vectorize basically all your information, and it's my understanding that Google, this is in pilot, I think, I don't think you can use it with your business account, but on your personal account, if you're using Gemini, you can type @Drive and @Gmail, and they have already pre-vectorized all of your content, which is like, that's pretty cool, right? So are you seeing companies yet do this, or is that still kind of forward-looking, Neal? Go ahead.
Seeing companies do this today, and in terms of the arms providers, a good example, and as you were kind of referencing it, a company called Glean, a startup, and raised significant dollars. But we've brought them in to meet with a number of the companies that we work with and that we're hoping to work with across all different industries. And it's just that, right? Oh, and the founding team there, I believe they came from Google search in the early days, right? But you call it enterprise knowledge management, enterprise search. And I think also, to your point, it can search internal and external in the same at the same time, the same interface. And whether it's the C-suite of an oil and gas company or a cosmetics company or semiconductor company, when they see the demo, you can see the wheels turning immediately of, oh
goodness.
gosh, what this could do for the efficiency of our people in their day-to-day roles.
Sure, and just understanding policy, for example. So you take the standard policy document, let's say it's 30 pages or 40 pages. Okay, how many people think anyone ever sat down and read the whole 40-page policy document? I bet you not many people did. I bet you very few employees ever did that. And search, old-fashioned search. I mean, I actually talked to a very, very smart lady who was at the Google search team years ago. And I remember thinking chatbots came around largely because corporate search stinks. Like on websites, like if you ever go to a website, like 5 years ago, if you went to the corporate website and search for something you want to find, you would get absolute nonsense, press releases and stuff that just means nothing. That's not helpful. But to your point, I actually heard a story of just that, of using it to find out how to fire someone. But the Suketu, what do you think?
That's a hard one to follow, how to fire someone, because I don't know. But to there's an aspect of this that you are pointing to, both Neal and Eric, is you got to understand how your business processes operate if you're going to apply these new technologies.
Right.
And that is a really critical part of it. So knowledge management only works if you know what you're going to do with the knowledge,
Yeah.
not otherwise. So you got to know where to apply these and how to apply this and how do your companies operate. And what has happened is, in larger and larger companies, they started with a very simple process. Customer needs something, I'm going to make it and find a way to deliver. And then we started adding layers on top, whether it was management layer, information layers, or process layers. And one of the big things that we see happening is you're stripping these down. All right. It is a reverse Mandelbrot. I know you said Schrodinger, so I had to go to Mandelbrot. But reverse Mandelbrot, where you're starting to clean everything up and go, this is how the process should run, and this is how a Gen AI will apply. So in the world of procurement, we created this thing. It's called 7 Steps of Procurement. Now we are working through and say, can we do it in 2? And the answer is yes. And we are seeing it in action.
Wow.
That's the kind of rethinking that is needed.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I have to say, maybe Neal, I'll throw it over to you to comment on, and it's very encouraging because I go back to this mindset issue. People get into a certain mindset, they do things a certain way, it's how we've always done them. Now is the time, if ever, to challenge those presumptions, because to Suketu's point, okay, you've done this 7-step process for years. Do you really need all those 7 steps? Like, can't you get a predictive score on steps 2, 3, and 4 and then move right to step 5? And that's kind of where we're seeing things go. That is innovation. That is where you save tremendous amounts of time and also keep your partners better informed, your employees better informed. And this gets to my soapbox topic, morale. When morale is high, good things happen. When morale is low, you could have all the money and resource in the world and bad things are going to happen. Are you seeing this too, Neal, that companies are figuring out how to leapfrog over traditional sort of staid processes?
Yes, I mean, and this is the classic, opportunity conundrum, right? Is big corporates are optimized around capital efficiency and risk reduction, and if public, obviously, quarter to quarter, metrics and numbers. You're kind of reminding me, but then, hey, sometimes that leapfrog disruption requires folks that are not from industry. I'm generally a champion. Someone left industry because they saw an opportunity, but left their existing role to go start a company to solve, or to address an opportunity or solve a challenge. But I'm remembering earlier in my career, we met with the founders of Square before Square existed. Right. And it was, well, wait a minute, these founders have never worked in the financial services industries, merchant processing, this can't work. Right. The things that they're talking about doing, that's not the way it works. The industry works, but that is what it took, right? As someone who was not bounded in existing reality.
Right.
But obviously, maybe my last point would be just weaving in a culture of innovation, a culture of risk taking. Certainly we see it. I don't think there's a corporate we work with where the people that we serve specifically go, gosh, our massive organization, we are nimble, we are flexible, and instead it's at times got to beat the head against the wall, right? In terms of to get change to happen. And I think it's top down, bottoms up, but it's a universal challenge, and it's It's also one born out of these very large companies that have been very successful in some cases, not just over years and decades, but centuries, marked in centuries. And
That's right.
that'll always be a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think you are seeing it at the big companies too. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. You are listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, time for the podcast bonus segment, and talking to an excellent group of individuals here, Alex Freed, Neal Hansch, Suketu Gandhi. Alex, I'm going to throw it over to you because you're in the startup world. You talk to startups all the time from the ideation stage and beyond, and there's a lot of activity in the supply chain world because guess what? Necessity is the mother of invention. When you have supply chain disruptions, there's a lot of money on the line. There are a lot of companies that are like, oh, what are we going to do? And that's where startups come in. What do you see happening? What are some of the more interesting ventures that you've come across, and where do you think things are going?
Well, Eric, I think I'll have to plug a couple of our portfolio companies that I think are doing really exciting things, especially as it relates to this topic. So one of them is Altana AI. And so effectively, they have a vast network of both public and private data. They believe it's one of the largest organized bodies of supply chain data in the world, calling it the Altana Atlas. And it's helping to customers visualize kind of their global value chains. And so I think we mentioned earlier on the show, kind of the difficulty of understanding, you have your tier one supplier, but what about the next tier and the next tier and going all the way to the end tier? So that's one of the things that they're helping to solve through that atlas, and then working with both, let's say, the US Customs and Border Protection to companies like Maersk to Boston Scientific to help them understand, are they complying with trade laws? Are there any of their suppliers that are, using forced labor or doing other, things that bad actors do? Or perhaps, are there any potential risks or bottlenecks in the fourth tier of their supply chain where they think they have a lot of supply redundancy or diversity, let's say the tier one or tier two stage, but they find out that there's actually this bottleneck at the fifth tier. So Altana helps identify those types of things. So in terms of visibility and an understanding of your overall global supply chain, I'd say that's one of the most exciting companies we've seen. Away from the software side, I think there's a lot these days that you see with, let's say, the robotics, the physical robotics and automation pieces as well. There's a maturation happening with some of the existing technologies. So articulated arms, autonomous mobile robots, ASRS, autonomous storage and retrieval systems. And now you're also seeing some of these humanoid robots come in. And it's both exciting, but also an open question of, is the humanoid robot form factor going to outperform some of these, existing ARM, mobile-based style formats as well? And then the last piece that I would mention is just, we've talked about it before, but in terms of exciting AI-related technologies that are coming in, it's the generative AI pieces, and even just outside of, let's say, the LLMs understanding emails and so on, but helping design products and goods faster, more efficiently to kind of increase the speed of innovation and the speed at which companies can release products. So yeah, 3 different areas, including one plug for one of our companies.
Now that's good. And you actually hit on a real hot button issue for me, which is alternative data, or as I sometimes refer to it, real world data at scale. Because when you can start capturing massive amounts of data, whether, let's just say it's product data, understanding how many oranges came in yesterday, understanding how many computer parts arrived. If you can get a baseline of what is out there in toto and then map that against your internal data, holy Christmas, that's where some amazing things can happen. Suketu, I see you nodding your head there. What do you think about that? The marriage of what I call real world data at scale, which is all this alternative data, and you can buy it from all kind of companies. You can buy it from credit card companies, you can buy it from states, from counties, from countries, and as long as it's quality data, to be able to map that against your own view of the world, that's some pretty compelling stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it is compelling, and it is useful. But one of the structural things that especially Neal and I talk to CEOs and boards all the time, that they're asking is this another transformation? Or what does this look like for the next 3 to 5 years?
Right.
And we tend to use the word regenerative, that you're going to be constantly regenerating. And a CEO client had this wonderful quote: "I'm not trying to figure out the end game. I'm trying to figure out that the game never ends." And in that kind of world,
That's good.
what happens is you are constantly looking and going, okay, I got a new set of data, whether it's artificial or internal. How do I use it? How does it change? So you go and run it, see the improvement, and then on to the next one. And this is a variation on, fail fast. This is learn fast model, not a fail fast model, because you have a lot of data coming in constantly and you can learn. And, one of the wonderful things we have always seen is that bugs are not failure. Bugs are an opportunity to improve your process. And that is the heart of regeneration, that goes, always keep the customer in mind, always understand why do you exist, always understand why your people are there, and then bringing these agents to constantly learn. So again, fail fast, wonderful, anybody can do that, but learn fast, that's the company for a long term.
I like that. I think that's brilliant. That's a very, very clever moniker, because like fail fast, like why do you want to fail? They'll fail.
Yeah.
Learn. You're not failing, you're learning. I'll throw it over to Neal for final thoughts here. And I have to say, Neal, this regeneration of knowledge management, I think, is absolutely spectacular. I think that's where a lot of the magic is going to come. But companies do need to be careful. You need to have some sort of governance practice in place. Now we can scan massive amounts of unstructured data. We can identify maybe data that's not so good, or maybe data that's personally identifiable information or sensitive. Do that first, but then absolutely leverage all that stuff. Now it comes back to life. It's been sitting on a shelf in SharePoint for the last 7 years. Maybe that's the best idea you've never acted on in your company. And because of this new AI, we're going to be able to find that. What do you think? Final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's I'm enjoying the fail fast, but if you're going to fail, learn from it and then iterate and integrate it in, and don't be afraid to. And you've got to take the risks, at least to a degree. I mean, I think it's also consistent with just innovation, and dare I say disruption is happening faster than ever right now. And so if you're the corporate executives, like you've got to make some of these bets. You've got to release the resources to test and then integrate and then scale in solutions. So you can say it's more exciting time than ever before. It's less about what are my direct competitors doing. It's what's happening out there that's relevant for my business, and take innovation disruption as a positive rather than a negative, right? Because it can make you more efficient, more opportunities for the top line. And it's an exciting and probably uniquely scary time to be an executive, with endless decision, endless sets of new data to have to digest and then figure out what the action is to take against it. And but I would not be doing my job if I didn't say that's why we're here. That's why Cardi's here. That's why Silicon Foundry here, to help be a partner, a thought partner, a guide through all of this.
That's great stuff. We'll look all these folks up online. Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked to Neal Hansch of Silicon Foundry, and Suketu Gandhi of A.T. Kearney, and of course, Alex Freed of Schematic Ventures. And send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@insideanalysis.com. That concludes our show. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.